Well, good afternoon and welcome to Crowd Church. We are an online church for those that might not see the point of church, for those who are looking for answers on how to live a more meaningful life. My name is Matt Edmondson and I am joined again by my very good friend, colleague, and all-round amazing person, which is Anna Kettle. How are we doing, Anna?
I'm good, thank you. That was quite an introduction. So yeah, very nice to be called an all-round good person.
An all-round good egg, as we like to say here in the UK. An all-round good egg. That's you, Anna. Definitely.
Thanks.
So, welcome to the... we've been calling these the non-live live streams. These are our sort of recordings during August because the team is having some time off, some well-earned time off in August. We're enjoying a bit of a break. So these live streams, although they're going out live on Facebook and YouTube, are actually pre-recorded. So we won't be responding to comments in the live stream, but we would love for you to comment and still keep doing that. People will be in the comments anyway, so just join in, say hi. It'd be great to hear from you. And yeah, that's kind of what we're doing throughout August. Anna, what do you think? And I mean, I appreciate you're here on the other end of the video camera here. What do you think to this idea of pre-recording live streams for the month of August?
I think it's a great idea because rest's really important, isn't it? It's it's an important biblical principle that we take time off and rest. It's something I'm passionate about. I wrote a whole book on rest, didn't I? So yeah, I'm a big believer in it. So I think it's a good book.
Yeah, it's a really good book too. You should definitely check it out.
Get the product now. Hold on.
Yeah. You
missed an opportunity there, didn't I, Matt? Where's our marketing on?
Yeah, nice little marketing moment there. We will, of course, link to Anna's book in the show notes. Do check out Anna's book, though. It was really good. What's it? Sand between your toes. Sanding your toes?
Yeah,
sand through your toes. Yeah. I knew there was sand and toes in the title.
It's a devotional, basically, all on learning to rest. So
yeah, it is.
Yeah,
and you've actually just give a
read in August, in fact.
Yeah, a good book to read whilst you're on holiday. So do grab hold of it. Yeah. And you also have a blog, Anna Kettle Writes, right?
Yeah, annakettle.com on the website and Anna Kettle Writes on Instagram.
That's it. Yeah. So, and you talk about a lot of it on resting a lot on your blog and on Instagram, which is great. So do follow along. And of course, if you would like to know more about Crowd Church, you can hit up the website, which is on your screens right now, www.crowd.church, or you can find us on Instagram or Facebook at Crowd Church. And if you are listening on the podcast and you can't actually see what's on the screen, a warm welcome to you as well. It's great that you're joining us. Do connect with us. Do head on over to the website, www.crowd.church. The links are on all wherever you get the podcast from. So do hit us up. It'd be great to hear from you. I'm always amazed, actually, how many people around the world consume the Crowd Church content and how it's all made possible with technology, which is fantastic. And it's always great to hear from the four corners of the globe. So do reach out.
Cool thing, isn't it?
Oh, it's amazing. I said this the other day. I don't know if you know this, but our podcast, not our live streams, not YouTube, but our podcasts, when I checked the stats the other day, a significant portion, like 7%, of the people, 7% of our podcasts were being consumed inside Russian borders, which amazed me, which is really interesting. And so if you are in Russia listening to this, know that we are praying for you and we are praying for the Ukraine still, that obviously peace would come. It's a crazy messed up situation. And so, but it's great that you're here and the gospel, goes across all borders, which is just lovely and beautiful. So yes. Anna, what is coming up today?
So we've got Esther talking today, and she's going to be sharing a little bit about her own story, all around mental health, and she's going to be helping us launch the podcast, isn't she?
She is, yes. Good segue there, Miss Anna. We have a brand new podcast which will be going live either today or in the next few days, depending on how we manage to marry up the technology. It's a brand new podcast called What's the Story? Now, if you subscribe to the Crowd Church podcast, you will need to subscribe to the What's the Story podcast as well. We're keeping them separate for reasons which I there are good reasons. I just can't remember them right now. And so there are two separate podcasts. One's called What's the Story and one's called Crowd Church. Do search for it on your podcast platforms, or the easiest way to find it might just be to go to the website and follow the links. Now, What's the Story? We say that What's the Story is a podcast where we hear stories about faith and courage from everyday people. Now, how the podcast differs is that in the live stream, well, the live streams, not the pre-recorded live streams, but the normal
live streams.
I'm getting myself all confused now. In the normal live streams, we have a talk, and then we will do Conversation Street, a bit like what we're going to do today, to be fair. And we respond to your comments and stuff that you throw up on Facebook. And that tends to be around a topic. So for the last year, we've been doing What Does the Bible Say About? And we've looked at a whole myriad of topics, Anna, haven't we? I mean, you've hosted on a shed load of them. And so some of the topics that you've done, What Does the Bible Say About Grief? You did that talk.
Yeah.
What are some of the other topics that have stood out for you?
I love the one on What Does the Bible Say About Women?
Yeah, that was a good one. Hannah Sloan.
Yeah. I love the one on healing. There's been a couple on healing, actually. Suffering. Yeah. I just think they're all big meaty topics. I love a good deep dive into these kind of things.
They are all meaty topics, and part of me is like, you can never do them justice with a 20-minute talk and a 25-minute Conversation Street segment. But we had a good bash.
But it's good food for thought, isn't it? It's good to kind of start the conversation. And obviously, the whole point is that people keep those conversations going in their week and in their own lives, and keep reading up on it. So yeah,
exactly. And that's what we want you to do, right? So that's been the last year of Crowd Church's life. We've taken this brief sort of pause in August while we've done other stuff. So we've kind of paused. What does the Bible say about? So John's did a talk on walls, going through the wall, emotionally healthy spirituality, based on that book. And we've had the Kent share. I shared something that was a little bit different to, the What Does the Bible Say About? So we've just done things a little bit differently in August. We are going to start again the What Does the Bible Say About series very briefly, and then we start a whole new series in mid-September, starting with John's Gospel. It's called Origins, right? Now, that's what the live stream has been doing, okay? What we wanted to do with What's the Story was kind of complete the picture. So you, for example, see Anna, the beautiful all-round good egg, which is Anna, week in, week out, hosting or speaking. And so what we wanted to do was deep dive into Anna's story. So you've actually recorded one of these podcasts, right?
I have, yeah. I've recorded a bit more about my own story.
Yeah, which was just...
You interviewed me, didn't you, Matt?
I did. Hopefully I did an all right job too.
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll find out. But you were fantastic. Me, on the other hand, no. We did. So it's an interview style. So I get to talk to people like Anna about their story, and we deep dive into their story, and we talk about faith and courage from everyday people, and we talk about how they, their journey of faith and how they became a Christian, which always fascinates me. And we also talk about massive challenges that people have to overcome. And certainly from a Christian point of view, how they've overcome those with the help of God. So this is the podcast, right? And it's called What's the Story? As I say, do subscribe. So what we want to do today, I appreciate this is a slightly longer introduction than normal. We would have been in the talk by now. But that's okay. What we're going to do today, as Anna has said, is we're going to have Esther Richards. Now, this is a 20-minute segment from they're normally about 50 minutes to an hour, the What's the Story podcast. They're quite in depth. And this is a 20-minute segment from my conversation with Esther. So if you want to hear the rest of it, subscribe to the podcast. So we want to launch the podcast today with this segment from the podcast with Esther, and then Anna and I are going to be back after this, after Esther, a little bit of worship, then we'll be back to talk about this talk. So here's your first glimpse at the What's the Story podcast.
I actually spent from about the age of 10 or 11, actually until the age of probably about 2021, really quite ill with my mental health.
Okay.
So I started off with like a lot of anxiety around school stuff. My mum would always say like, oh, she was a bit of a worrier as a kid. But then when I was probably about 11, um, I had some issues with friends at school. And so I had like physical illness symptoms, but nothing was physically wrong with me. And the doctor was
Yeah.
like, oh, maybe it's an anxiety thing. But I was like, oh, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. And then that just basically got progressively worse throughout my teenage years. And so developed into major, just like general anxiety, but also a lot of social anxiety, really suffered with panic attacks, and then eventually depression. Kind of the depression started probably when I was about 16, 17 was when that got really bad. Kind of just powered through it, to be honest. Lots of doctor's appointments that didn't really go anywhere. Some like school counseling that I had, which was helpful. But then eventually, once I turned 18, they gave me antidepressants and that helped. But basically just got through high school, essentially. I think a lot of my friends struggling with some similar things. So there was some kind of camaraderie in that, I think. And then just found Liverpool, decided to go to Liverpool for uni. I studied archaeology with Egyptology, and I was like, that sounds cool. I'll do that. Didn't really have much of a sense of like, oh, I really want to do this, because I didn't really see my future, because I just saw that I was struggling. And so I thought, well, there can't be much of a future for me. So I'll just pick something that sounds interesting, because it doesn't really matter what comes next.
Okay, there's a lot there. If you don't mind, we're going to dig in. We can't just brush over some of these things.
So,
so you struggled then a lot with mental health during your teenage years.
Yeah.
And you were struggling with mental health through your A levels. And were you struggling with mental health when you were in Liverpool in the early days as well?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So, do you know what kickstarted the anxiety? You said something that happened about 11, but your mum's always called you a bit of a worrier. Is that so? Had you always been anxious as a kid, do you think, or was there a trigger point?
So. I think that I would. So there's like different types of mental health, and sometimes mental illness is like caused by situations, and sometimes it's just to do with the chemicals in your brain and the way that your brain is wired. So there's some history of it in my family, and again for a few generations. So I think in terms of generally, I don't think there's anything that really kickstarted it. I had some, like when I was about 17, we had some like family stuff go down that didn't help, but I was already pretty bad at that point, so that didn't really make that much difference. So yeah, I would say it was just kind of always there. And the doctors would often say to me, like, you will deal with this for your whole life. That's what they told me. They said, you'll be able to get a little bit better and you'll have help, but you'll probably never come off antidepressants, and you'll probably always be in therapy, because they were like, this is just how you are. So yeah, nothing.
Deliver hope there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of what I was living like under, having that spoken over me basically as a teenager, and into when I moved to Liverpool in my first year of uni.
So do you remember then being anxious as a kid before you were a teenager, or is this something that you sort of, it's a wrong phrase, but is this something you sort of grew into as a teenager?
I think I was anxious as a kid. I mean, I don't massively remember, but I think I was like a bit of a worrier, and I did, I wasn't always the most like adventurous and confident. I'm quite shy, like quite quiet, I think. I mean, maybe my mum might listen to this and go, she was a nightmare. She definitely wasn't quiet. I'm not sure. I never know. I will find out.
She was an angel. She was an angel.
Yeah, great. But yeah, I always like struggled making friends and things like that, So I think I was always was, and then I think being a teenager is like hard. I was saying this today, actually, weirdly. I do not miss being a teenager at all. It's really hard, and it definitely gets harder as time goes on. And so I think if there's already a bit of that in you anyway, in how you naturally respond to situations, then being a teenager often just makes it worse because there's a lot to think about and learn and work out. So I think it was there, but was exacerbated by teenage life.
Mm. And so you've got this sort of general anxiety, as you call it, just the general worries about life, but you use this phrase social anxiety. What did that look like for you?
So I think immediately of my prom, we had I had a weird school system. So I went to middle school and high school, even though it was in England. So I got 2 proms. But so in year 8, I had prom, obviously. And I was getting ready for it, and my friends were about to arrive. And I was running around the house like a mad person trying to get everything together. And I remember standing in my parents' living room, just like breathing really, really, really fast. And my mum was like, "Okay, you okay? Like, chill out." But I couldn't put like an obvious rational reason as to why I was feeling anxious. But I knew that people would be like, I was going to be around people. And I'm naturally introverted anyway, but that is different to social anxiety. They're 2 different things. But it was like this thought of being around people just made me anxious, and I couldn't explain it. And when it was bad, when it was really bad, it would stop me going out and doing things. So especially when I was in university, there'd be days where I would just stay in my room, and sometimes I wouldn't eat, or would like run out to like heat something up in the microwave and run back to my room because the fear of seeing other people was so much that it would stop me from leaving the house. But it was never something I could explain. So I couldn't be like, "Oh, I'm nervous that this would happen," because I knew it wasn't rational, which is how you know it's something that's like an illness, because it's not rational and it's not, you can't like think it away. It was just there, and I couldn't challenge it.
So, I mean, that all sounds pretty horrendous, if I'm honest with you, Esther. So how bad did it actually get for you, the whole mental health thing? How low did you actually go?
It got pretty bad. So it got worse when I went to university, I think. Again, first year of university can be really hard. New place, new people, new everything. I had already had some like incidences of self-harm when I was a teenager, but that got worse when I got to university. And I again had this when I was a teenager, but got worse in university, where I just was like, there's literally no point me being alive. That was kind of where my headspace was, because I was like, well, I don't have that much impact. People probably wouldn't even notice if I stopped living. That was genuinely what my head would tell me. So I would say it was probably like around the February of my first year of university. It was about 3:00 in the morning, and I called my sister. I called my mum, she did pick up because it was 3:00 in the morning. And I called my sister, and she did pick up. And I was like, I just don't feel safe by myself, because I didn't want to live anymore. But there was this instinct inside of me that also was like, yeah, but you should probably live. So I think it's really hard to explain. There's this like weird kind of conflicting thing that happens where you're like, I don't want to be alive, but also I don't want to die. And it's really hard to explain unless you've been there. But I ended up walking at 3 a.m. to Liverpool Royal A&E. And my dad, bless him, managed to wake up my parents. And my dad got in the car and drove from just south of Birmingham all the way up to Liverpool, 3:00 in the morning, to come and get me. But sat in A&E for about 6 hours because they only had one mental health person on staff that night. So they couldn't get around to seeing me. But I remember walking up the road and just walking up the path towards the Royal and just looking at the path and like not letting myself look at the road, because I was scared that I would walk straight into it. Because I was like at that point where I was like, I'm done. I just don't want to So I was like, just look at the
Wow.
path, just look at the path, because I didn't want to be tempted by the road, which is like, it's heavy, but you know, it happens. It's real. It happens to people. That was my lowest point. And my absolute legend of a dad came and picked me up. He sat with me in A&E for a bit, and then I'd been there probably for about 3 or 4 hours, and they came to me and said, listen, it'll be another 6 hours. And I was just like, I'm tired. I'm done. I'm exhausted. And I was really afraid of being admitted into hospital. I knew that actually, that looking back now, maybe I needed that. I don't know. But also, I would have actually been able to say no to that if I had wanted to, but I was really afraid. So I just said, Dad, just take me home. So went home, and I stayed at home for about a week, then went back to university. But that was really the lowest that it got. That was the closest it got to anything like really terrible happening.
Wow. So, I mean, you've answered this question, and thank you for sharing, Esther. And it's not easy stuff to talk about. I appreciate. And as you were talking, the question that I wrote down in I have a little notebook here where I jot down all my questions as we go along. How did your parents deal with all of this? Because obviously you've moved away from home. The mental health issues have got worse.
Mm-hmm.
And your dad's obviously struggling with this because he's getting in a car at 3 o'clock in the morning. I mean, your dad is a legend. I mean, you know, and I feel your dad's heart because I have a daughter, and you just kind of go, of course I'm going to get in the car at 3 o'clock in the morning. Why would I not? But how have they dealt with it, and how have they kind of supported you throughout this time? I guess is another question.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when I was a teenager and I was first struggling with it, I remember them saying to me, like, this is still new to us, so you're going to have to be patient with us because we don't know how to deal with this. So they were super honest with me from the start, which is always helpful. And it took me a while to talk to them because there's like stigma and everything that comes with it all. But they were great. I mean, they would chat to me when I needed chatting to, and I was like, just need to have a conversation or cry or rant or whatever. I don't really know how. I imagine it was really hard because I'm their kid. So obviously that is not what they want me to experience. They would never, I don't think they ever really like went into detail about how it affected them. I remember just before I moved to Liverpool, I remember my mum saying to me, like, you don't have to go. Like, it's okay, you can stay. If you don't need, you can cope. And I think part of me, I can be quite stubborn. So that I was like, well, I'm definitely going now. But that was like 2-year-old in me. So, and I think I kind of saw that they really wanted to protect me, but they were amazing because they didn't hold me back. And they trusted that I knew myself enough to know whether I could do it or not, which was amazing. And I know that a lot of people don't have that, and they really will just follow your lead, basically. So, and I remember, I mean, this is a bit of a, I guess, spoiler for later, but I remember when I told my dad that I'd stopped taking my antidepressants, I'd come off them. Like, I remember his reaction was just awesome. Like, he was so excited and he gave me this massive hug. And I think then I was like, oh, this has really affected them like a lot when I saw it afterwards. But yeah, I don't really know. I think both my parents have had experiences with mental health here and there. I think as everyone has, like everyone goes through stuff. But yeah, I think it must have been tricky, but they did a great job. I think they probably don't realize quite how good of a job they did. But yeah, I think they just trusted me to know my limit, but because they'd already set up that I could come and talk to them if I needed them. Yeah. And they
that's wonderful. And imagine, I imagine there were a lot of prayers behind closed doors. Is what I imagine was going on a lot there. So here you are at your lowest point, right? You've wandered into the hospital. Your eyes are focused on the pavement. and obviously you've given us a slight spoiler alert, but before we get into what happened and maybe how God worked with you to come through this, how did you reconcile in your head, or did you reconcile in your head this idea of mental health, the stigma, and how did God let me get here?
Sure.
I mean, this is because none of this should add up, right? None of this should equate, and I know a lot of people struggle with this type of thing. So, how are you at this point dealing with that? You know, the health issues and the theology.
Yeah. I mean, that was really hard because obviously, like growing up with it, with knowing the Bible and knowing that, truly believing that God had the best for me and that God made all the right decisions. To then be sat in a position like that, I was like, hang on a minute, this doesn't make any sense. I remember reading, there's a verse in the Bible that says, for God did not give me a spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and of a sound mind. And I remember reading that really specific translation of sound mind. And I was like, well, I do not, my mind is anything but sound. Like, I remember going to my dad and being like, this does not describe me. I was like, I am fearful. Like, that is what I felt like. And I remember my dad giving me this explanation of like, it's a promise. And we live in this, like, what we like to call this tension of the now and the not yet, which we like to use to explain things, which doesn't necessarily always explain things, but it is true. But that actually that's God's promise over us, and that we still live in this world. And so we live in a world that is fallen, even though we are God's people who He has saved and made holy. We live in the world and we live in these bodies. And so, I mean, it was really, really hard. And I think that one of the things I remember saying to somebody, who's probably my dad, was like, the best thing about all of this is that I have learned that I definitely actually trust God. Because I think when everything's great, and you go, like, especially if you're young and you grow up in a Christian family, you think, yeah, I think I trust God, but it's never been tested before. Like, I just assume that I do. But then I went through something like that bad, and I was like, well, no, I really trust God, and I can trust that He's doing the right thing. And I can't really attest that to anything. Like, I'm not like, oh, great, I did a good job because I trusted. And I do think that was just off the back of like knowing Him well and spending time with Him, but also the prayer of people around me. Because prayer is just so powerful. I remember multiple times sitting in my bedroom at home and in halls, just crying, like absolutely devastating, having a horrible time, and just saying, God, I trust you. So I think that in some ways, being completely without anything else, I was like, well, I only have God. So I don't believe that He's given me this. I don't believe that He's made me like this. So I have to trust that He'll bring me out of it. I just know that God has me and that He will use it for good because I trust that. Because it's all I could do. And if I didn't have that, I probably wouldn't be here today. Because that was the only thing I had to lean on. And so I think as hard as it is sometimes to kind of wrestle with that, but why? We know that God is good regardless. And so we have to lean on that because that is the only thing that is going to get us through those points in life.
Wow. So your last therapy session was January 2019, which at the time of recording is 3 years ago.
Yeah.
How's the last 3 years been? Do you feel like you've got stronger and stronger, or has it been a bit more up and down? Have there still been struggles and fights, or how have you found that?
Kind of both, to be honest. I think that I have got stronger and stronger, but it's also been up and down. I mean, it's been a weird 3 years because there's been a pandemic. And I think that kind of bashed everyone's brains a little bit. So there was that. And But my general, like, I would never say at any point that any of my major symptoms have ever returned. I would never say, like, I've really struggled with my mental health. There have been other things I've had to work through. So when you go through something for that long, it does leave marks, and pattern behavior. So, like, when I was talking about being a kid, that I just responded to things in a certain way. Like, I think that to some extent, I still do that, but it never, ever, ever goes past a healthy level of worry and anxiety. So I don't remember the last time I had a panic attack or got so anxious I couldn't move or couldn't leave the house. I think for me, like, getting better from mental illness doesn't look like every single day is perfect, because actually that just doesn't exist. It's just not how life works.
Well, it's just not life, is it?
Exactly. Yeah. But actually what it looks like is being able to deal with that in a healthy way and not letting it. So if I'd had like a bad day, say 4 years ago, I had a bad day, that would have affected my month. Whereas I have a bad day and I get up the next morning and carry on as if it's fine.
Let the king of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, he is my song. Let the king of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom of my life. Oh, he is my song. You are good. You're good. Oh, 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 let the king of my heart be the wind inside my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, he is my song. Let the king of my heart be the fire inside my veins, the echo of my days. Oh, he is my song. Let the king of my heart be the fire inside my veins, the echo of my days. Oh, he is my song. For you are good, you're good. Oh, and 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 you're never gonna let me down. 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 You're never gonna let me down. You're
So there you go. That was my conversation with, well, it was 20 minutes of my conversation with Esther. Anna, what did you think?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, amazing, Esther. I mean, I think it's just really courageous to come onto a podcast like that and share your story. That's obviously so personal for her and was quite painful at the time. And just, yeah, it's really brave. I'm just always impressed with people who come on and share their stories about hard things. And, you know, it was personal and it, you know, affected her whole family. And yeah, it sounded like she went through some really tough challenges for a while. And yeah, so thank you, Esther, for sharing it. It's, you know, I think mental health is so important to talk about, and it's so great that people are, you know, doing that now. And I just think it's always so courageous.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Could not agree more. In fact, it is worth saying, actually, right here at this point in the broadcast, if this comes out at the time we expect it to, bearing in mind it is a non-live live stream, then next week we actually are kickstarting again What Does the Bible Say series. And it's going to be What Does the Bible Say About Mental Health? And Lisa Orange, who is a trained counsellor, and just a beautiful lady, is doing that. Hosting it with me is Frank Hargreaves, who's a retired GP. And so I am definitely outnumbered on the on the qualifications side of things, that's for sure.
Yeah, you've definitely got some clever medical people there to talk about, which is great, because what do we know about these things?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? It's just like, wow. So yeah, we've got Frank and Lisa next week, hopefully talking with us about mental health. So do come join in for that, as we're going to do a bit more of a deep dive on it. Because today was a bit more about Esther's story and sharing, you know, what she'd learned along the way. And next week, Lisa's going to unpack a little bit more on the whole topic and the Bible verses surrounding that. Because the Bible actually has a lot to say about mental health. Surprisingly, the Bible has a lot to say about everything, it turns out, if you dig in there. And so I'm really curious to see how Lisa responds to that and pulls that out, because she's just fabulous and it's going to be great, I've no doubt. So yeah, do come join us for that, especially if mental health is an issue for you, like it was for Esther. You know, we are not claiming, just putting this out there, that there's going to be a quick fix, but there is always hope. And that's the one thing I think I took from Esther's story. I'm like, man, there were years of hard times where she is just pressing into God. And now she seems to be reaping the rewards of that, which is great, you know. And the last few years, which is the you know, the time that I've known Esther, she is such a transformed lady, lovely lady, recently married. We talk about that as well on the podcast. I think she was a month into a marriage when I interviewed her.
Yeah, I only met Esther quite recently, and so I didn't know that was her background, to be honest. But yeah, I love the fact that like her story just shows that it was like a mixture of you know, kind of trusting God and doing spiritual work, but also doing a lot of work on her emotional health with a therapist, which is really important for a lot of people, and also working with medical professionals to get antidepressants and, you know, whatever drugs she needs to sort of, like, I love the fact that she's honest about the fact that there's not this quick spiritual fix, but actually it was all of those things working together that over time became sort of her journey towards healing and getting better and being in a place where she's really well mentally now. And I love that honesty, that it's like, yeah, that sometimes those things come together and all of them are important.
Yeah, they are. And I think one of the things I guess I've noticed over recent years, and Anna, you may have noticed this, is that there is less and less stigma attached with mental health and antidepressants. At least that seems to be, you know, from where I sit, which I think is a good thing. And I think, I mean, Esther touched on the fact that there was stigma. She found it hard to talk to her parents straight away because of that. But hopefully the conversations are opening up. And yeah, we're definitely not one to sit here and judge on the issues of mental health or antidepressants and taking medications and things like that.
No, not at all.
And, you know, please don't feel that we would. You know, this is, I think, a safe space to explore some of those questions around faith and all of that sort of thing. So do stick with us, especially next week as we're going to deep dive into it. I think Esther has She's surprising, Esther, when she's talking, and you kind of like you, when we were doing that interview, I was learning as we were going along. I'm like, I knew a few bits and bobs, mainly because I'd done a prep call with her before the interview, where I drew a few of these things out, so I wasn't totally surprised. But yeah, like you, just thank you, Esther, for sharing that story. Thought it was super vulnerable. And if anything from Esther's story hits a nerve with you and you would like someone to talk to or connect with, we definitely are not trained counsellors. Do bear that in mind. And maybe the best person to talk to is your GP. Do check with them. But from a spiritual point of view, we can definitely help and steer things and give you some help and guidance. So do reach out to us at crowd.church, www.crowd.church. Or on Instagram or Facebook at Crowd Church. You can reach us through social media. We would love to hear from you. If you do go to our website, you will also find on there a WhatsApp number where you can text straight into the Crowd Church here, and someone will get back to you as well. So do reach out to us. Don't stay isolated. Do not be alone in this. Which Sharon did a talk on. What does the Bible say about loneliness? Just before the end of August. So I have to say, Anna, when I think about some of the topics we've covered recently, so what does the Bible say about loneliness? What does John did, the emotionally healthy spirituality talk, going through the wall. We've got Esther's today talking about mental health. Next week, we've got what does the Bible say about mental health? None of these things were planned. It just kind of happened that way. And I kind of thought to myself the other day, oh, goodness me, there seems to be a bit of a theme emerging.
Yeah, all about emotional wellness. And I know the Bible doesn't exactly use the term mental health very much, does it? Because, I don't know, that's not the language of the Bible, but it certainly talks a lot about feelings and emotions and how we think, and all of that is mental health, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It talks. Esther used the phrase "sound mind," so that's probably more the right language of having a sound mind. It talks in other places about having the mind of Christ. It talks about us renewing our minds, being transformed by the renewing of our minds. Scripture is really interesting in this, in that it talks about how transformation starts with change of thinking. And that's quite an extraordinary thing, actually, when you think about it. I remember reading a book called is it Your Brain at Work or something like that? I can't remember the exact title of the book, but I remember the author, David Rock, and in there he talked about an iceberg, and he said at the tip of the iceberg you have behavior, right? Or no, sorry, you have outcomes, you have results. And so people look at their results and they want to change them. And so you're told, if you want to change your results, change how you behave, right? So if you want something different, do something different. And he talked about this as an iceberg, and he said those two things are above the sea. And then below the sea, he said, directly below it, you have your emotions. And so recently, we've learned, actually, if I want to change how I behave, I've got to change how I feel. I've got to work on my emotional health to make sure my behavior is working in such a way that I'm going to get the results that I want. And now all the modern textbooks tell you that actually way below, right at the bottom of this iceberg, which are always much bigger under the sea than on top, right at the bottom is thinking. And if you want to change how you feel, you've got to change how you think. So it all starts with thinking. And I read the book and thought, this is brilliant. I like the iceberg analogy. But the Bible 2,000 years ago says, if you want to be transformed, start with changing your thinking, right? And so sometimes we double back on ourselves. And so I guess my question to you then, Anna, on that basis, it's a bit of a wide question if I'm honest with you, how has your thinking been transformed from Scripture in recent years? How's that transformation happened for you?
Oh, that's a big one, isn't it?
Yeah, I told you it's a bit of a wide question.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of a good example. I suppose one of the ways is, like, we were talking about rest the other week, weren't we? And for me, one of the ways that my thinking has changed, and then that's changed my behaviour, is I used to be quite a hurried, busy person who just filled every minute of every day, and then kind of hit a bit, we're talking about walls, kind of hit a bit of a personal wall. And then in terms of particularly when I first became a parent, it was like, right, I can't work full time and do all these other things with my evenings and weekends and be a good parent and continue to do a full-time marketing job excellently. I just can't do it all. And so for me, it was like going back to scripture and changing how I was thinking about how I was living my life and what Jesus taught us priorities in terms of rest and, you know, all his teachings on rest and Sabbath, and actually starting to put some of that realizing and getting that thinking right and addressing some of those things that weren't right in my thinking about why I was so driven, and then out of that, actually changing some of my behavior and being like, I don't need to be so driven and always on, because I can rest in who I am and, you know, not having to do all the things. That's been a bit of my journey over the last few years in terms of changing one area of my thinking. It's just not really about mental health, but it is about how the way you think affects everything in your life. And really, when you brought it all down to sort of the grassroots, it was like I didn't really trust that God would meet all my needs. Like I felt like I had to work hard and provide what I needed for myself, and that was what was driving a lot of like overwork really in my life. So yeah, it's interesting. What about you? Have you got any examples?
Yeah, I mean, a similar thing on rest and Sabbath. I think that's probably one of the behaviors that's changed a lot recently. And it's driven this whole, let's take August off as a sabbatical, you know. And I think for the last year, Sharon and I have been doing this Sabbath, you know, having a Sabbath day every week. And Jack Mariner did a talk on Sabbath and rest
just
a couple of weeks ago.
We tried to do it as well as a family, like once a week.
It's a great thing to do, isn't it? And actually, I think that's very beneficial, or has been very beneficial for my mental health, is just taking that rest. So I don't do social media, especially on that day. I don't open my emails on that day. I you know, the Sabbath is a break. And Peter Scazzero, I think that's how you pronounce his name, the guy that wrote the Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. He's got a great podcast. I've not read his book, but I do listen to his podcast. I'm more of a podcast guy. He talks a lot about Sabbath and a lot about rest. And he talks about the need for it, you know, as in there's the Sabbath day of rest for the week. You know, the Old Testament, a lot of farmers had to rest their fields for a year. You know, there's a lot of things that the Bible talks about in this whole sphere. And I just remember being really challenged by it and going, goodness me. Like you, I actually had an identity in working crazy hours. Do you know what I mean? And I always wanted to be, if someone came into a room and said, oh, geez, I've been busy, I just wanted to know in the back of my head that I could go, yeah, but you've not been as busy as me, bud. Do you know what I mean? And I don't know why. It was just one of those thoughts in I couldn't verbalize it. It's just, it was always there. And so the whole thing about rest was a huge challenge. And so...
and I think it does affect a lot of people's mental health, doesn't it, that area? Because, like, we live in such an always-on culture now. You know, like, I think as much as we love technology here at Crowd Church, it does, like you say, you can always have emails and social media, and you know, you can do the shopping list late at night, and you can do your online banking in the evening, and you know, you can be talking to people at the other side of the world in a different time zone, and on it goes. And so there's never really any downtime, is there? Like, whereas previous generations, at least Saturdays or Sundays were a bit more of a rest because shops closed and like things just stopped happening in culture, didn't it? I think now we're like, that's one of the downsides of technology. You have to be really disciplined about unplugging because it's always there. And, you know, there isn't a sort of Sabbath, you know, there isn't a day where shops shut anymore, is there? Or where even when they're shut, you can still buy stuff online. And there's just, it's because it's so countercultural now. I think it's a really intentional choice to actually take a day out where you say, I'm not going to focus on productivity today.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It is. And if you think about what social media does, going back to the whole mental health thing, predominantly one of the things I find myself doing is comparing my life to the photographs that I see. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's constant comparison. It's like, well, hang on a minute. They've got that. Why have I not got that? They've got that skin. Why have I not got that skin? Or that hairstyle. Why have I not got it? Or those clothes. Or that holiday. Or that lifestyle. Or that dream. And I find, social media is one of those things where people only ever put their best moments of life. And so it becomes an easy place to compare yourself. I read a statistic which said, the average female, the average girl, the average woman, I was thinking about this for my daughter. She sees over 3,000 images a day now, most of which are photoshopped, aren't real. And so not only are you comparing yourself to that image is actually, you can't even attain it. It's totally unrealistic. And so, so if you
I know.
about,
what does that do to like women's mental health and sense of who they are? But then also in between that, we're watching like hundreds and thousands of adverts every day, popping up every few seconds online, and more than ever before. And they're not just like on billboards now; they're like invading in our homes and in our pockets and all the time, aren't they? In our bedrooms and everything. And and it's like, and how, like you talk about, discontent and kind of comparison. But what's that doing to us all the time? It's constantly reinforcing the message all day long to you that your life isn't enough as it is, that you need more, that you should want more. You need this to be happy now. Now you need this. And that I think has a huge impact on our mental health for all of us.
Oh, it's got to be massive, especially with the amount of disinformation that's out there. I mean, and you think about the lack of trust that breeds. Like, no one trusts the government anymore, especially in the UK, and you can understand why. No one trusts the news or what's shown on Facebook, yet we still watch it because of fake news and all that sort of stuff. And it just, I can. Coming back to the point, how has the Bible helped me renew my thinking? I think the practical practice of taking Sabbath and unplugging and just doing a day unto the Lord, just God, this is your day. Do you know what I mean? And just unplugging from anything and everything and just going, right, let's just retune ourselves here, rebalance life. It's such a life-giving practice and so positive for my mental health that, that's my thing, I would say.
Interesting.
Anyway, on that bombshell, I think we'll end Conversation Street. Just to say again, just to remind you, if you weren't with us at the start of the broadcast, that What's the Story is a brand new podcast from Crowd Church, and we deep dive into people's stories. We talk to real people, everyday people, about their stories of faith and courage. And it is a separate podcast which you must subscribe to. And you can do that wherever you get your podcasts from. The links will be on the website. The actual video recordings, if you're a video type person and would rather watch it rather than just hear it alone, it will be on YouTube. You can check out the Crowd Church YouTube channel, and it will also be they'll be on our Crowd Church website. There'll be a whole What's the Story section where you can download them. You can stream them and watch them. Just don't do it on your Sabbath day. That's all. Just unplug. And so you can check those out. Like I say, more information at Crowd Church, www.crowd.church, or on social media at Crowd Church. And like I say, if anything has touched you today and you want to reach out to somebody, connect with somebody, please do get in touch. All the details are on our website. So www.crowd.church, you can get a hold of that. Anna, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule in this crazy hot weather for being with me so we can pre-record these things in August. It's been interesting.
Yeah.
We picked the heavy topics.
We hardly ever do light ones, do we, to be fair?
When I'm looking down the schedule, if we go, that's a light topic, and no, let's not get Anna to help us host that one. So no, that's been awesome. Anna's going to be back with us. I'm just looking down the diet. I don't know when you're next on, but I assume you're hosting at some point in the new term.
Yeah, I will be there at some point. I can't remember the date either. Some point in the autumn. I'll see you guys soon. Have a great rest of your summer, everyone.
Yeah, do enjoy it. Thanks for joining us. Make sure you subscribe to the live streams wherever you get your live streams from, whether that's YouTube, Facebook, or on the podcast. It's been great to connect with you. God bless you. Have a fantastic week. And that's it, I think, from myself and Anna. Bye for now.
Bye.